Welcome everyone to A Foggy Day on Olympus and to the second episode in our series on the 20th century Balkans. My name is Mike Pierce.
And my name is Coel Campo, and this is a wonderful part of the world where Mike lives, unfortunately, and I've visited a couple of times. But during the 20th century, it wasn't so wonderful of a place, now was it?
Well, the cultures and historical legacy were there, but instead of presenting a dazzling spectacle like now, they merely were the cause of chronic conflict.
Yes, the reason for which was the rise of modern nationalism.
Yes, a curse which will certainly afflict the comment section to these episodes. So let's get this warning out of the way now.
Oh boy. This is about to get rough for a moment, everyone.
Well, passions over this subject run extremely high, and there's almost nothing one can say that won't make somebody mad. And so, if you're watching to have the heroism of your ethnic group or country confirmed, or to have your Yugo nostalgia and the stories about the partisans they told you in school backed up, or you're already mad because outsiders are daring to say anything at all about all of this, well, you just sit there and get mad. We are not looking to vindicate any group, ethnicity, or faction, not even yours, especially not yours. We're seeking to understand what happened and why. Are we going to simplify things? Yes, we shall, or this series would be many times as long as it is. But the fact that we omit something you might have wanted to include does not mean we have it in for your identity. This is as dispassionate as we can make it.
Yes, but to be fair to likely critics, it is true that we see nationalism and socialism as the problems, not the solution.
Indeed.
Okay, so are we done with that bit now?
Why not?
Okay, so looking at this statue here, I've seen this in Belgrade, I know, but you'll have to remind me and our viewers.
Okay, well, it is a monument put up after World War One in Belgrade, yes, in the Kale Megdan, which is a gigantic fortress that overlooks the confluence of the Sava and Danube rivers. Although this statue doesn't, it's back a little. And it's a thank you to France for fighting on Serbia's side in World War One, and it was a French general that led the combined forces of French and Serbs and Brits and a few other odds and ends surging northwards in 1918. And it was produced by our friend Ivan Meštrović, who was a Croatian American sculptor, extremely prolific. Loads of statues he created all over the Balkans. He's often called a representational sculptor, which I translate as saying that he made sculptures that actually look like something, as opposed to most modern artists who don't. But our American viewers have skin in the game here, especially if they live in the Chicago area, which is where he was based for his many years in America, because some of his works are there too. Yeah.
Okay, so last week we looked at the seething turmoil across the region up to 1914.
Yes, it was the conjunction of the floundering of the old Ottoman Empire and rising modern nationalism among many of its subject peoples.
And after several convulsions, we arrive at the famous assassination in Sarajevo.
Yes, we do. Now, we dealt with this last week, and we're going to look at an even briefer version thereof right now. This man, Franz Ferdinand, is the heir presumptive to the throne of the Habsburg monarchy, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and he is with his wife, Sophie Chotek, who was Czech, and they paid a state visit to Sarajevo on the 28th of June 1914, which is Vidovdan, one of the most sacred days in the Serb calendar. So that was pushing their luck a bit, and the luck certainly ran out. There was an attempt to assassinate them in the morning that failed, actually. And in the afternoon, quite by accident, there was a success. I am very scornful of conspiracy theories generally, whilst I instantly concede that there are conspiracies like this one, sometimes when they succeed, they do so by accident. And that was the case here. The Archduke's car was supposed to continue along the riverbank, but turned right into a side street instead, and then stalled right by where young Gavrilo Princip, one of the conspirators, was making his way home. There will now be a pause while loads of completely uninformed people concoct a new conspiracy in their heads. Oh, the chauffeur must have been on the side of the plot. It's absolutely pointless arguing with such people. Anyway, the real world operates far more by cock up than by conspiracy. Well, so they were murdered. Here is the young assassin who was just a little bit too young under law to be executed, so he was imprisoned. But as you can see from his death date, he was imprisoned in circumstances so horrible that he actually died 4 years later. And there was extensive backlash afterwards, as there often is when bad things happen. Loads of Croats and Muslims in the city decided that all Serbs were guilty of the assassination and went on the rampage against Serb businesses. A couple of people were killed, and loads of shops and so on were thoroughly trashed.
Okay, so now this is pretty bad, this assassination. But however bad it is, it's not like it caused World War One, right? I mean, it was the domino effect that flowed from it.
Yes, and not the riots I just mentioned, but the diplomatic domino effects. Yes, this is a very long story and we can't tell it properly here, but basically, hawks in the Austro Hungarian government decided A, that Serbia must be to blame, which was arguable, and B, that now was a very good time to put Serbia firmly in its place and to make war on it, and presented an ultimatum that was so harsh it was designed to be refused, therefore to justify a war. Russia stepped in diplomatically and basically told the Austrians, if you make war on our little Slavic Orthodox friend, we will make war on you. Germany, already tied by alliance to Austria-Hungary, calculated almost certainly correctly that Russia would defeat Austria-Hungary and therefore sidled up against Russia. And France, calculating that that combination would defeat Russia and leave a German-dominated continent, then started making threats of its own, and the British, as is their wont, sidled in at the last moment, and the whole thing collapsed from there. Yes. That's a short, slightly cartoonish version, but we have so much to cover today. That's going to have to do, and in any case, most of you will have looked at this in school. Right. So the fighting between Austria-Hungary and Serbia starts with an attempted attack on Western Serbia or northwestern Serbia from Bosnia, actually, led by this man, General Oskar Potiorek, who was governor of Bosnia-Herzegovina, but he was not at all a good general, and the assault failed, to the astonishment of a lot of people, actually. Well, here we've got a crude Austrian propaganda poster from the outset of the war. It's a dreadful play on words, and it portrays the Serbs as peasant bandits with a primitive obsession for knives. So playing to stereotypes there.
Okay, maybe you can run us through the play on words.
Well, okay, so proper German for Serbia must die, which is what that slogan is supposed to mean, would be Serbien muss sterben. But they've stuck an extra I in sterben to make it rhyme with Serbian. Serbien muss sterben. It's enough to make you wince, quite apart from the crude stereotyping there. But anyway, we get the general idea. Here we've got a picture of some Austrian soldiers, and here we have a map of the kind, again, that everybody will have seen in school, seeing the line up between the central powers, essentially Germany and Austria-Hungary to start with, against Britain, France, Russia, and of course Serbia. But other powers come in later on, most notably the Ottoman Empire in the fall of 1914, and Bulgaria, as we'll see in a moment, in 1915 on the side of the Central Powers, and Italy, which had originally been allied with the Central Powers but had decided not to participate, and then the following year came in on the side of the British and French after Britain had promised them an unconscionable amount of territory along the Dalmatian coast if they did. But we can't pursue that. Okay, so here we have a map showing that first confrontation between the Austro-Hungarian forces and the Serbs, and astonishingly, Serbia managed to defeat the invaders in the Battle of Tser in August 1914. So right at the outset, 200,000 Austrians were repelled on the Bosnian border by 180,000 Serbs.
So this is astonishing because Austria-Hungary is so much bigger than little Serbia.
Yes, that was what everybody was expecting. And quite possibly the Serbs themselves were rather surprised by their own success. But the Habsburg forces were very badly organized. Potiorek was incompetent. But the other thing we have to remember is that the Serb troops were all battle hardened. And it's always been true. It's true right now in Russia and Ukraine and other theaters of war in the world that all other things being equal, they seldom are, but all other things being equal, battle hardened troops will beat troops who haven't had that experience because they know what to do. They are used to the sensations and the panic and all the rest of it that goes with actually being in battle. Now, here comes the first of a number of book recommendations I'm going to be giving today. And the title of, I'm not quite sure how to say his name, Vavro's book. That's just my guess. I may be wrong. It's one of many excellent surveys of Austria-Hungary's final war. In fact, two other excellent surveys are propping up my laptop as this moment because they're so thick. But the title, A Mad Catastrophe, expresses the judgment of many contemporaries. This picture here shows us Serbian troops at the Battle of Tser. They lost about 5,000 men, but they inflicted 18,500 casualties and captured 6,500 prisoners.
Right, and they're battle hardened because they just fought two short wars in 1912 and 1913, for which you can see our episode last week.
Yes, please do, everybody. Yes. Second book recommendation, this time a novel. It's a classic Serbian novel by Dobrica Ćosić, and he narrates the experiences of frontline soldiers during 1914. So if anybody who's watching this is familiar, for example, with Solzhenitsyn's novel August 1914, it's that kind of, grunt level view of what it's like to be there. Yes. Here we've got a cute picture of a 12-year-old Serbian soldier, Dragoljub Jelicic, and you can see from his death dates that he did actually survive this experience, but there he is in 1914.
Oh my gosh, was this a unique instance or is this pretty common?
I'm not sure. I don't think it was common, but I don't think it was unique either.
That's heartbreaking.
Yes, it is really. But what can we say? He did survive it. Well, after those initial successes in 1915, the war went, perhaps predictably, disastrously for Serbia. But what really caused the collapse was the entry of Bulgaria into the war, because Serbia now had to fight on three fronts: north and west against the Habsburgs and east against the Bulgarians. And you can see from this map here how that went down. So that 1915, there is a total collapse. This is the front page of a French journal, Le Petit Journal, pointing out that when Bulgaria entered the war, Serbian resistance was doomed. And this magazine portrays this move as a stab in the back. Bulgaria wanted revenge for the Second Balkan War of 1913 and to recover the territories which it had briefly gained in the First Balkan War.
Now, to really understand the logic of what's going on here, viewers definitely need to watch last week's episode.
Yes, please do. Please do. Even worse, 1915 saw a dreadful epidemic of typhus in Serbia. Now, through so much of history, diseases and epidemics have accompanied war, and nearly everybody watching this will know that the end of the war was accompanied by an incredibly disastrous flu epidemic around the world, which killed more people than the war. Well, in Serbia in 1915, there's this typhus outbreak. It killed hundreds of thousands of people. And this and the conflict, the collapse really of Serbia militarily, were chronicled by John Reed, who will be a name familiar to many people, perhaps particularly American viewers. He was an American journalist and communist. He's most famous for his 10 Days That Shook the World, which gave an account of the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. Well, this shows some soldiers looking at destruction wrought by German and Austrian artillery in central Belgrade in October 1915. The Austrians who came in certainly perpetrated a number of atrocities and war crimes. And here's a picture of Austrian troops executing Serbian prisoners. We have, I'm afraid to tell you, even more grisly pictures that we could show you, but we are not.
Yes, those were vetoed from the PowerPoint.
Yes, yes. By her who must be obeyed, yes. But I do agree with you, actually, yes. By the way, not simply in terms of grisliness, but simply in terms of numbers of pictures available, it was vastly more than we could possibly squeeze in here. So what you're seeing is everything edited down to a simple, coherent, but hopefully still balanced narrative. Now, here comes another book recommendation, and this is The Resurrection and Collapse of Empire in Habsburg Serbia, 1914 to 18, basically looking at what the Habsburgs did with Serbia once they'd got it. So it looks at their occupation and how they controlled it. And here we have a couple of other accounts of Serbia during the Great War. There are many volumes on this subject. These are two of the better ones: Serbia and the Balkan Front 1914 by James Lyon, which, as you can imagine, is mostly military history. And then Andrej Mitrovic's Serbia's Great War, looking at the conflict as a whole.
Okay, now we're about a quarter of the way through, and that's 6 books that we've already pushed on people.
Yeah, we're doing. Listen, the reason we pay you the big bucks is because of all the money we get from the book publishing industry. So don't complain about it.
Right, clearly.
Yes. Okay, so here are Serb forces retreating along the Morava Valley in southern Serbia in 1915. This shows King Peter or King Petar of Serbia going into exile riding on an ox cart. And the bulk of his army are heading over the accursed mountains. And 355,000 Serbs, that's soldiers, but also a number of accompanying civilians, retreated across them into Albania, into the territory they had tried to invade in 1912. So they're going amongst a population that detests them. And they found themselves attacked by pursuing Bulgarians and Albanian tribesmen. That is the correct term for northern Albania during this period. It's still very, very primitive society, and attacked by the elements as well. And more than half of them died en route.
So they're being invaded from the east by the Bulgarians, in the north and west by Austrians. So they're fleeing south and southwest.
That's it, yes. They need to get out of their territory, either directly into Greece or, as we've seen, more of them went across Albania. And those that did survive and got down to the coast were picked up by the British and taken over to the British held island of Corfu. So here we have some of them arriving there, where they were able to recuperate.
Are they just going to stay there for the rest of the war?
No, they are going to be eventually shipped around Greece to start a new front in southern Macedonia, which we're going to look at in a moment. Meanwhile, back in Serbia, a lot of Serbian soldiers had become prisoners of the Austro-Hungarian forces. These are being fed in the street. Here we have some soldiers outside a kafana, a cafe in Belgrade. From that brickwork, I'm guessing that's going to be on the side of the Kalemegdan somewhere, the huge fortress. But if anybody, perhaps a Belgrade resident, knows different, I'm sure they'll tell us in the comments.
Yeah, don't hold back.
No, no, no. Well, the soldiers in this picture can afford to smile because they are being billeted on these Serbian peasants.
Now, billeting soldiers on ordinary people had been going on for hundreds of years, and it was about the worst thing that could happen to ordinary people.
Yeah. As soon as you think about the practicalities, it's obvious. The cost of food and sleeping arrangements were the least of it. Although for people living close to the margins of existence, even that's significant. Armed, ill disposed men, foreigners, staying with you, the vulnerability of wives and daughters, the danger of violence, the lack of care for your property. It was a disaster. But there were atrocities going on as well. We've already mentioned some of those carried out by Austro-Hungarian forces. This is what's left after a massive Bulgarian massacre. 2,000 to 3,000 Serb men, especially intellectuals and public functionaries, killed by Bulgarian occupation forces in 1915 to 16. And this is at Surdulica in southeastern Serbia. And shifting our focus a little, the Austrians also captured Montenegro. And here are some of their troops in conquered Cetinje, which at the time was the capital of Montenegro. Today, of course, it's Podgorica, but it was the capital at that time. Okay, well, let's consider then the Macedonian front and how that panned out, because it stayed hardly moving at all for a long time. It was sort of deadlock. Here's a map of the Balkan fronts after the Serbian collapse. The only one we're concerned with here is the one in the south, those red lines. And you can see there was just incremental movements forward from 1915-16 through to 1917-18. And then right at the end of the war, a sudden rush northwards.
So, all those Serbian soldiers on Corfu that we mentioned a minute ago, they got shipped around southern Greece to form a new front against the Bulgarians and the Austrians. Was it just Serbs who were moved around this way?
No, the force was very, very multinational. The French were basically in command and they had big numbers there. There were also lots of Brits. And then, as I say, the Serbs. But there were also contributions from other countries. Greece entered the war very late, but when it did, obviously that's where Greek forces were going to be. There were even a few Russians there. So here we've got Bulgarian soldiers on camels, would you believe, in Macedonia during 1915 to 16. On the other side, these are local boys carrying rifles and equipment of newly landed French soldiers in Salonika, Thessalonica, whichever of those names you prefer, in February 1916. So I'm not quite sure if it's the excitement of seeing soldiers. I suspect quite a lot of it was that they were doing this for money, so it was a way of getting a few pennies. Well, here we've got a mixture of British, French, Serbian, Russian, and Italian officers in Salonika in 1916. And this shows British forces moving into the attack in Monastir in Macedonia. Today it's called Bitola.
Now, Monastir or Bitola had been Ottoman until 1912, and then it was captured by the Serbs in 1912. But then the Bulgarians had taken it during 1915.
Right. And so what the Allies are trying to do is to roll the Bulgarians back. And it's going to take quite a long time militarily for them to do that. Yes. Okay, here we've got some Serbs arriving from Corfu, and they're near their camp at Mikra, near Salonika, in April 1916, and Serbian infantry on the Salonika front. And this shows flooding in Austrian-occupied Skopje. in May 1916. And here's a religious service going on for soldiers in the Austrian army, although the inscription uses the Albanian name Uskup, and it's for Jewish soldiers in the Austrian army, and it's officiated by one Rabbi Dr. Jakob Zenger. So there you go. Here we've got an elderly Turk traveling near Gevgelia in March 1916, which is now on the border. It's just inside North Macedonia today, the border between that and Greek Macedonia. And here we've got another Turkish family in Strumica in the eastern part of the same region.
So there were still Turks living in these regions.
Gosh, there are still Turks living there today, and they're generally very well thought of. In 1918, the Macedonian Front finally collapsed, and the Allies, including the Serbs, of course, suddenly rushed hundreds of miles to the north, recapturing Serbia from the occupiers and bringing down the Habsburg Empire in the process. So this shows the magnitude of Serbia's losses during the war.
So Serbia may have been on the winning side in the Great War, but the price was appalling.
Yes, it suffered bigger losses proportionate to its population than any other participant in World War I. So its population had been only 4.5 million. Its army, 420,000, which is extremely large when you think about it. That's nearly 10% of its population. But it had just been involved in two wars in 1912 to 13. Its military deaths were 244,000, so that's a majority of those soldiers died in the war. There were civilian deaths from typhus, famine, and the brutal occupiers. Total losses came to around 1 million, which is around 25% of the population. And here's the real shocker: 58% of all males aged 15 to 55 had died. And there are 114,000 disabled soldiers and 500,000 orphans.
So, to be the devil's advocate for a minute, and don't say anything about that, you could say Serbia's enemies might say that this is sort of what happens from having provoked Austria-Hungary in the first place with the assassination of Franz Ferdinand.
Yes, Serbia always denied that it was responsible for the assassination. I mean, what is undeniable, really, is that the links to the terror group did run very high in the Serbian administration. But did the people in charge of government, did the king know about it, intend it? Probably not, and certainly can't be proved. But the debates rumbled on for quite a while after the war. I have in my possession here, you will be appalled to hear, this, which came out first in 1930 or something like that, and is stuffed full of documents, the real purpose of which is to show that World War I was not Serbia's fault. So it's certainly a question. It remains discussed and debated to this day, but I think most Serbs would insist that even if Apis was involved, and he almost certainly was, right, that it didn't run beyond him within the Serbian government. And for those who don't understand the reference to Apis, please see last week's episode. All right. So this map shows us the dismemberment of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, with Austria and Hungary being reduced to two small countries in the center of Europe, Czechoslovakia being created as a new country, and to the northeast even of that, Austrian Galicia being given to a newly recreated Poland, Transylvania and most of the Banat being given to Romania, the southern Tyrol being given to Italy, and the Istrian Peninsula, and then the rest being given to create the new state of the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes.
So it looks like Serbia is being given a huge reward for being on the winning side.
Yes, and, as we shall see in the rest of this episode, really over-rewarded. And that's not some kind of moral judgment or ethical judgment. It's a purely practical one, that it's being given so much that it can't manage everything that it's being given. You could make a similar case in respect of Romania, but that we can't go there today on that subject, of course. Okay, so that now brings us, with the conclusion of the war, to the creation of the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes. Quick glance at a map so that viewers can, if they want, stop the video here for a while to look more closely at the general realignment of borders across Europe in the aftermath of World War I. But this is the map that really concerns us here, how the Balkans looked after World War I, so in 1919. And here we've got a picture of Serbian army soldiers entering Stjepan Radić in Zagreb at the end of the war in 1918.
Now, I've been there a couple of times, but in those days, the statue was facing the other way around.
Yes, it was. In this one, he's still in his original position, Ban Jelacic, waving his sword to the northeast towards Hungary. But nowadays, yeah, he's back to front. But that's a story for episode 5, I think.
Okay, but more seriously, if I'm a Croat living in Zagreb, and I or my loved ones have been in the Austro-Hungarian army, this isn't necessarily going to feel like a liberation, is it?
No, it isn't. It is arguable that one might feel that the Serbs are brother Southern Slavs, but this is not a universal sentiment, to say the least. And there was then, as there is now, a tendency right across this region to look down upon the people who are to your east and to your south as being A, poorer, and B, less civilized than oneself. So up to this part, Croatia has been, well, amongst the more southerly regions, not really the more easterly ones, of the Habsburg Empire. And so they feel they're being run by those people up in Vienna who know what they're doing and who are at least relatively well organized. And now they're going to become a province of another state governed by those Serbs from over there. So at least as frequent will have been the sentiment that we're coming down in the world. Yeah. Well, there was lots of pushing and shoving about precisely where the borders should be, not just around the new kingdom, but elsewhere in Europe. And we're just going to notice 3 of those here. The most peaceful is this one in Carinthia, where a plebiscite was held, so a referendum amongst the local population. Which state do you want to be part of? Should the territory go to Austria, which is, of course, been greatly reduced in size, but will this area at least be part of it? Or will it go to the newly created Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes? And the populace decided for Austria. You can see on the little pie chart at the bottom there what the majority was. And on the map, you can see relatively how strong the support was for one area or another. Well, here we've got a poster in advance of the vote, and it's in Slovene, and it says, in Yugoslavia, so loads of people are already calling it that, even though that wasn't its official name, the farmer is the prince. In German Austria, the Jews and the barons are.
Yikes. So the farmer is the prince is appealing to the peasants, which is fair enough, but appealing to anti-Semitism as a reason to choose Yugoslavia over Austria.
Well, yes, it's bad, but it just shows how very, very widespread anti-Semitic sentiment was across the continent, and particularly in East Central Europe. A very large proportion of the population of Vienna, for example, was Jewish. So that was a fruitful line of attack. But here we've got a pro-Austrian poster, also notably in Slovene. So the boy is saying, Mother, do not vote for Yugoslavia, or I will be drafted for King Peter. And Mother is holding a Bible, which makes me wonder whether this is hinting at the fact that the Slavic state will not be majority Catholic. It's going to be run by those Orthodox. So I think it's playing the religious card there.
Right. So, was it unrealistic to hope that some Slovenes would prefer to be part of Austria?
I don't think it was unrealistic. I think this poster is entirely realistic. Some Slovenes did vote that way, just as some Poles in Silesia, in a similar event up there, voted to be part of Germany.
Right.
Although we can't pursue that one now. There were loads of people up there who weren't at all sure whether they were Poles or Germans. Loads of people's ethnic identity was not clear even to themselves.
Right.
One of the many, many fallacies of the whole nationalist logic. Okay, well, we should also mention that there was a big dispute about the fate of Fiume or Rijeka. Its name, both in Italian and in Croatian, means river. And it became an epic conflict, which wasn't decided until January 1924, when the city was finally divided. Italy getting the bulk of it, including the city centre, with Yugoslavia holding the workers' suburb of Sušak. So between the wars, loads of Croatian workers had to commute to work every day across an international frontier.
Sounds like a headache.
Yes.
Okay, well, I know this is a gigantic story, so we're really just gonna ding it here and give it proper treatment when we do our series on the aftermath of World War One at the end of this year.
Yeah, that's what we're going to do. Well, the third of these conflicts that we should notice at the very outset is that in Montenegro. Montenegro's King Nicola had fled into exile in Italy, which is where his wife was from, but armed Montenegrin resistance to the new state that was being created continued for several years, although the title of Pavlović's book about it is still a bit over the top, I think, Balkan Anschluss.
Hang on, why is that an over-the-top title?
Well, because by calling it that, he's basically doing what loads of dumb politico types do today, which is invoke Hitler and the Nazis immediately, right? The Anschluss is the word given to Hitler's absorption of Austria in 1938. So he's wanting to make a parallel with that, which is pretty unfair. But in its favour, it does at least cover in English these events which are not often covered elsewhere. Okay, so let's mention a couple of other books here, both by Dejan Djokic. The first one, Pasic and Trumbic, considers the wrangles between two leading politicians, one Serb, Nikola Pasic, and one Croat, about the shape of the future state and their interactions with the Versailles Peace Conference. And this next work by the same author considers the whole history of interwar Yugoslavia.
Do you think our viewers have run out of money yet?
Not yet. We mentioned Nikola Pasic a moment ago. Here he is. That's a very impressive beard, I think. I hope he didn't spill his coffee into it. Anyway, here's the central points of his biography. So he started as a young radical belonging to the Radical Party, and he ended up as part of the institution. So he's Prime Minister of Serbia briefly in the early 1890s, and for most of the period from 1904 to 18, and then Prime Minister of the newly created Kingdom of Serbs, Croats and Slovenes for most of 1921 to 26. As a youngster, he'd had to go into exile with relatives in Bulgaria in the 1880s for his radical nationalism. But when he had his say, he gleefully pursued pro-Russian and anti-Austrian policies, totally in line with what the new Karađorđević monarchy wanted down to World War I. And when he finally got what he wanted, which was this greatly extended kingdom, he wanted it to be a unitary state, not federalized, to ensure Serb dominance. And he used police intimidation of opponents and ethnic minorities in the 1920s. So we've got a statue to him here in Nikola Pasic Square in Belgrade, and it stands facing the Skupština, the parliament. Okay, so this map shows the provinces of the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes during the early years. And here we've got a picture of a 1,000 dinar banknote in 1920, which we include just because it's a really pretty picture and a really pretty banknote.
And so the old Serbian currency is now the new Yugoslav currency.
In a way, yes, it's a little more complicated than that, but not much. Yes, in essence, that's right. But of course, it was the same thing with the monarchy. The Serbian king is now the king of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes. The capital city is Serbia's capital of Belgrade. The parliament is the Skupština in Belgrade. So for non-Serbs, it felt like a Serbian takeover.
Yeah.
And we can see this kind of artwork will have reinforced that message. This is Bijeli Orao, the White Eagle of Serbia, by Dragutin Inkiostri Medenjak. So the Serbian eagle grasps the broken banners of Austria-Hungary, Bulgaria, and the Ottoman Empire. And the banner of Montenegro is lying there waiting to be grasped. And this kind of triumphalism made it hard for non-Serbs not to feel that they were the subjects of Serb domination. So here we have a picture of King Alexander I, who becomes king in 1921.
Yeah, so he's the son of King Petar, who has just died. And I know you've got biographies of both father and son that you want to sell us.
Yeah, I have. They're just behind me right now. But I, being all mercy, will spare you.
How nice of you. So he's king over a country that's still hardly modern at all.
Quite. Almost 80% of people are engaged in agriculture, forestry, or fishing, and just under 10% in manufacturing of any sort. And only one person in 26 works in the public sector, and that includes the military. So you can imagine that the taxes are not really very considerable. By the way, there's no records broken there. In pre-modern societies, taxation levels were actually low, stories about Robin Hood notwithstanding. Right? Most people are engaged in subsistence agriculture and just about keeping themselves alive. So in their world, any taxation at all is ruinous. This is not sort of somebody following free market purism or something like that. The poorer the country, the less the resources, the less there is to tax. So this new kingdom does have some industry, but not very much. But it is nothing like as modern as, well, even Austria, let alone, France or Belgium or Germany or Britain or something. Yeah. Well, this picture shows us some of the 400,000 or 500,000 orphans who are there as a result of really 6 years of fighting from 1912 to 18. And Serbia was ruinously poor. And here we have some maimed Serbian soldiers waiting to receive wooden legs in 1920. So they've been without them for, at a minimum, 2 years then. Here we've got Split on the Adriatic coast in 1926.
Yes, on the Croatian coast. We've been there.
Well, yes, we have. And it's amazing. And here we've got a hardware store in Belgrade. Pram Filipovic and brother. I think with a name like that, he's going to be Jewish, but I'm just guessing there. Here we've got Mirjevo, a suburb of Belgrade, and here a picture of rural poverty in southeastern Serbia, Sarajevo, and some Serbian peasants in the 1920s. Now, looking further south, Nada Boškovska's excellent volume looks at the situation of northern Macedonia, which was still considered by the government to be southern Serbia during the interwar period.
This has got to be a record for number of book recommendations.
Yeah, but this one is a real goodie.
And he actually has all of these books, people. His house is a darned library.
A darn good one.
Well, yes, there is that, I suppose.
Exactly. Yugoslav Macedonia had suffered huge damage during the war. And we mentioned this here to pacify any Macedonians who were fed up by what we said in last week's episode. It was in the 1920s that most Orthodox Slavs there start considering themselves to be Macedonians as a national entity, precisely to oppose the insistence of the government that they were really Serbs. Right, that's the point where loads of Orthodox Slavs start to think of themselves in those terms. Many of them had done before, but in purely a geographic sense. That is, in a sense that included, Albanians and Greeks and Turks and Vlachs and Roma and so on. But now it's coming to be intended in something like the meaning that Orthodox Slavs who live there today would use that expression. Now, VMRO, the guerrilla group we discussed a lot last week, still existed and mostly based in Bulgaria, launched raids into Yugoslav Macedonia throughout the interwar period. So the government's attempt at forcible assimilation on the one hand and the attempt to contain political violence on the other led to heavy repression in Yugoslav Macedonia during the interwar period. Out of 17,000 police in the entire country, 12,000 of them were in Yugoslav Macedonia, which had only 10% of the population. So that tells us its own story. Well, we've got a picture here of a parish fair at Bardovci near Skopje in the early 1920s. And it would be remiss of us not to mention this. Here's a picture of two ethnic Albanian girls in Skopje. The one on the left, Agnieszka Gonje-Bajorciu, I think I'm saying that right, will become better known as Mother Teresa. And here she is again at age 18 in 1928. And that's the year she moved to Ireland, and 1 year before she arrived in India. And if you don't know who Mother Teresa is, you are in the wrong channel.
Right. We can't help you with that.
No, you're being unhelped by us and probably by most people. Anyway, okay, so here we've got a picture of women in Tetovo, which is in Yugoslav Macedonia, let's say, in the 1930s, and is to this day an overwhelmingly ethnically Albanian populated town and Muslim, but dressed far more conservatively then than most people there would be today. And here we've got ethnic Albanians dressed less conservatively in Peć or Pea, Peć in Serbian, Pea in Albanian, in Kosovo in the 1930s. And here we've got some Serbian women from the same city in 1934. Now, this map gives us a breakdown of the strength of Catholics and Orthodox within the country. So in 1931, Yugoslavia had 14 million people. That was 6.8 million Orthodox, and their strengths are shown in the map on the left, and 5.2 million Catholics, as you can see in the map on the right.
So that means that there must be about 2 million Muslims. Where were they concentrated?
Well, Muslim Slavs in Bosnia and the Sanjak of Novi Pazar, which would be southern Serbia, and northern Macedonia, which the government insisted was also southern Serbia, and Albanians, mostly in Kosovo and parts of Macedonia, little bit of Montenegro as well. Yeah. Well, here we've got a picture of the congregation of a Baptist church in Zagreb in 1928. Evangelicals often found themselves in trouble with the authorities, and their numbers were tiny. Few and far between, but most numerous in eastern Slavonia, like Osijek, where I live, and Vojvodina, which had been southern Hungary, and was now northern Serbia.
We don't really have time to say how these people got to be there, do we?
Sadly, not now, but they were most numerous in ethnically mixed areas, especially where there were Germans and Hungarians and Slovaks. Yeah, but for now, that's really all we can say. Now, we really need to mention this man. He was an immensely popular leader of the Croatian Peasants Party, which wanted more autonomy for Croats within the kingdom. They were by far the largest minority. Here he is with supporters of his party at the Skupština, the parliament in Belgrade, but he was shot and mortally wounded by a Montenegrin deputy, Punša Radić. So Radić kills Radić, right? Similar names, I know. In the Skupština on the 20th of June 1928. He wasn't killed there and then, though his nephew was. He was taken back to Zagreb, but he died on the 8th of August. And the killing permanently alienated many Croats from the idea of Yugoslavia. It's hard to emphasize how popular he was amongst them. He got, or his party mopped up something like 75 or 80% of the Croatian vote in elections, which is just incredible in a democracy.
Right. Yeah, and there are streets named after this guy in Croatia today.
Yes, and a dirty great statue just off the main square in central Zagreb. Yes. Mark Bjondic's biography of Stjepan Radić is the standard work in English. And yes, I think that is the last of the book recommendations for today.
I don't believe it.
Well, the murder of Radić was a tragedy for the kingdom and its internal politics because there were far darker forces lurking in the wings, about which we will say much more next week. This is in the middle here, Ante Pavelić, looking quite the dude, in 1926, and his Ustasha movement was emerging as a Croatian fascist terrorist group.
Now, there were fascist groups in most countries during the interwar period, but this one had a big future ahead of it, which, like you said, we'll look at next week.
Yes, it did. And that future was pretty darn awful. Well, in the wake of this disaster, the politics inside the kingdom were now becoming so unstable that in January of the following year, the king brought an end to democracy and declared a royal dictatorship and renamed the country formally Yugoslavia to emphasize its unitary nature. The former name had been the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes, which sounds a little loose and ramshackle, and now we're emphasizing that it all belongs together. Administratively, it was subdivided into 9 Banovinas, which became 8 10 years later when 2 were merged to form the Banovina of Croatia. But the idea of the Banovinas was that they were determined purely on the basis of geography, not on the basis of the old ethnic or linguistic divisions. They were named after rivers, so Drava, Sava, Danube, and so on. So it's a little arbitrary. It's very modernist in its way.
Right, but this was done deliberately, right?
Yes. So again, to settle down ethnic divisions as much as can possibly be done. Yes. Okay, so we've got a portrait of King Alexander here. This one taken in that year of 1929. And 3 years later, he goes on a state visit to France. Here we've got a picture of him with French Foreign Minister Louis Batu shortly before he is assassinated. And in this next picture, taken, I think, by a journalist or somebody opportunistically just after the shooting in Marseille, and it was carried out by a joint team of Ustasha and VMRO on the 9th of October 1934.
Now, VMRO, we mentioned last week, they were very active in Macedonia before 1914, but they were still clearly very active.
Yes, and very terroristic. Yes. Okay, so after this assassination, Alexander's cousin, Prince Pavle, or Paul in English, took over as regent for the new king because the new king was only 11 years old, Petar II. So basically, he is now running the show. Remember, it's a royal dictatorship. So he's actually in charge. Well, a couple of shots from the later years of the kingdom. So this shows Ilica, then as now the principal shopping street in Zagreb. Here we've got the main square, Trg Bana Jelačića, in the fog. Could almost be London during that time, right? In the 1930s. And here on Kaptol, which is one of the main hills on which the old city of Zagreb was built, that's the one with the cathedral, in 1937. And Dolac Market, also in central Zagreb, in 1940. Here we've got Muslim men praying in Vrno Gradište in northwest Bosnia, 1936. And a Roma woman and child in Sarajevo in 1938. And a Catholic couple in the same city the following year. Here, this map shows us that literacy and illiteracy were strongly correlated with having been part of the Habsburg Empire prior to 1918. So you can see that literacy levels are way higher in the north, the areas that have been part of the Habsburg Empire.
So the Habsburgs did have a civilizing mission.
Well, maybe, but it doesn't seem to have had much effect on some of the Dalmatian coast. And of course, okay, they were only in Bosnia for 30 years, so we might let them off the hook there. But still, the contrasts are very stark. So this map shows male illiteracy. So again, it's showing that the same general pattern. Male literacy levels tended to be a little higher. So female illiteracy higher. And we can see female illiteracy here. And it's overwhelming in most of the kingdom still in 1931. And finally, as we mentioned a moment ago, in 1939, the Banovina of Croatia was founded by merging two of the pre-existing ones, and it was aimed at solving the Croatian question.
So this was an attempt on the eve of World War II to sort of pacify Croatian nationalist opinion.
Yes, but the explosion that was coming when the Nazis invaded in April 1941 meant that no amount of appeasing could have been enough to dampen down the passions that would be unleashed when that happened.
Right.
And that explosion is what we're going to be looking at in next week's episode.
Right. So we hope you enjoyed this. As usual, we want to make our usual plea for you to repost this on social media and bother other people with it so they can lose their money to book recommendations and give us lots of views.
Yes, if you're going to make yourself unpopular, do so for a good reason.
Right. And if you're not from the Balkans and suffering under the delusion that World War II, however awful, was a fairly uncomplicated fight between two sides, you're about to have a rude awakening. So you should join us next week for the dizzying, no real good guys horror that unfolded.
Yes. And people from the region will already be familiar with this. So we're going to be looking at that next week. We look forward to seeing you then, everybody. Thank you. Bye-bye now.
Bye, everyone.